Welcome to the Leadership Conversations podcast. I'm your host, Jonno White. I'm the founder and principal consultant of Clarity. We are an Australian-based consultancy that works with leaders around the world, and our passion is to invest in people to become everything they're meant to be in order to fill the world with healthy organizations that people love to work for and customers line up to buy from. The goal of this podcast is to invest in you and your leadership. If you're just joining us for the first time, then feel free to check out consultclarity.org. That's our website, consultclarity.org. We have so many free resources on there, the most popular being our 7 Questions on Leadership series. We've had more than 1,500 leaders from around the world in all different sectors give their in-depth answers on leadership, what books they love, what they found most challenging, the most meaningful stories, how they structure their time through the day. That's free, so go and check it out. And we'd love to interview you about your leadership. I believe you have advice from your experience, your context, and your life so far that is important and can help other leaders. It's also a great way to give back. It's free to get involved, and you can do so by going to consultclarity.org/7-questions-interest, or just Google consultclarity.org 7 questions interest and fill out the form that pops up. We have a free resource for you on our website. It's called Leadership Survival Guide. It's a 57-page ebook. It has interviews with 10 world-class leaders, and you can go to consultclarity.org. It's right at the top, and get that today. We also have a daily email that we send out to over 15,000 leaders, and that email contains the highlights, our best content from our podcasts, our blog, my book, the books that we're loving that are out there about leadership. It's also the best way to get access to our masterclasses and workshops before anyone else. And there's also exclusive and limited special options just for subscribers. And you can subscribe by going to consultclarity.org/subscribe. Now, my gift to you is to work incredibly hard to provide the best leadership content I can to invest in you and your leadership. So if you're finding our content helpful, if you find this podcast helpful, then your gift to me could be this. If you do find it helpful, then write a review or rate our content and make sure you subscribe or follow. I can't emphasize enough how helpful that is. It really does help us to get the word out there so we can invest in more leaders to become everything they're meant to be. It also means a lot to me personally when people like you and people in our community share our content on social media. So if you do that, then please do look for me, Jonno White, to tag me, and look to tag Clarity on whatever platform you're on. And our team, including me, I'm always looking to see when people have mentioned us so that I can engage with you. And also we look at sharing content. So if you write something about something we've done, there's also a good chance we'll share that with our followers. So if you could do that, that is a massive, massive help as we try to invest in as many leaders as we can around the world. Last of all, you can check out my book about how to deal with difficult people even if you hate conflict. It's called Step Up or Step Out. It's available on Amazon. You can just look up Step Up or Step Out Jonno White, or you can go to store.consultclarity.org/book and check it out there. I have coached leader after leader after leader, and in more than 50% of the sessions, this topic comes up. How do I deal with this person? I'm finding it really difficult, and I just want to find a way that doesn't blow up to just to have a difficult conversation, to lead them better. How do I do that? There's a 3-step process that I outline in this book that I believe can help you. Okay, let's get into today's episode of the Leadership Conversations podcast. Enjoy. Welcome to another episode of the Leadership Conversations podcast. Today's guest is Dr. Brenda Williamson. Brenda is head of school at the Canadian International School, Vietnam. Brenda, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
First of all, can you tell listeners a bit about who you are? And I mean, it's pretty clear what you do from what I just mentioned, but a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Okay, sure. I think, first of all, it's probably not that clear to most listeners. People think that they know what happens in the school every day, and I think most people would be shocked at the things that leadership teams do in schools. So, oftentimes people ask me about, what a typical day is, and I have no idea. I have no idea what other people interpret a typical day as, but I have never had a typical day. So, yeah. I am. I'm an American, as you can probably hear from my accent. I started off my career in education as a teacher, like a lot of people do, and then through kind of the focus of my time, my life here on earth has been service to people. And that
Mm,
took me on a bit of an adventure, which has turned into international school leadership. It started with working with a small school in Indonesia that was a national school. And over time and through not only Indonesia, but Korea, Vietnam, where I currently am, and in the future, I'll be returning to Indonesia, working with people who are trying to do education well.
mm,
So I've kind of taken the roundabout journey and fallen a little bit backward into international education, but it is a little different from education that's practiced in each country because with international education, of course, we're working with students with a variety of cultural backgrounds. So it
hmm
requires a bit of cultural skill and ability to adapt and not only legally but professionally and understanding families and what they desire for education is a blending of a lot of different things. So in my background also I have uh, obviously my doctorate, which I've done in education, but interestingly, and added to that, a bit of time with Harvard Graduate School of Education on some advanced leadership items that I've thoroughly enjoyed learning about in the last 10 years or so. And some of those things have been quite useful to me as a leader in international education, and I'd love to share those through our conversation today.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to chatting about that. Before we pressed record, we were just having a little conversation about that, and I was saying how much I'm keen to learn from you, and I think listeners will be really keen to learn something as well as we unpack a bit of that. First, can you tell us a bit of your story? Go back as far as you want, even to childhood. What are some of those moments in Brenda's life that have really shaped you becoming the leader and the person that you are today?
That's a great question. I consider myself a bit of a servant leader in that I need to discover what it is that people need out of my role as a leader, and so that does start in childhood for me. My father was a military man. I grew up as a military brat in the United States Navy, particularly and especially in the submarine service, which is very unique. And so my father was a servant to his country and a servant leader as
Mm,
part of his responsibilities in leading a crew of submarine Navy men. And so that was certainly an example to me growing up. And then for me, my background in the church did influence me and learned
mm,
a lot about how to work with people and to have a service orientation on life. And that,
yes.
bloomed into, what's my platform to serve the world? What's my rent or my dues that I owe the world? And how do
Mm,
I do that as an adult? So all of that influenced me along the way. And particularly, I think the people in my life that were service oriented. My personality, I think, is very set. I think I was always destined to be a leader. I think that's something that when you're in your youth and your 20s, you struggle with because people don't want to follow necessarily. But you grow through that by having relationships with other people that support and help you understand how to coach others because I was coached, because I was supported, because I was given feedback and correction and supported in my development as a leader leading up to the point when I could be quote unquote an official leader, have
Yeah.
a career in it, or have a responsibility in life that required me to step up to that plate.
Yeah, that's thank you for sharing some of your journey. And uh, I guess for you, as you've sort of taken more senior leadership roles, are there any moments that really stand out that have been particularly pivotal in your leadership journey where sometimes it's watching another leader do something incredible, or lead through a crisis, and you're just in awe. Other times we drop the ball, and that's actually super formative, and we go, I
Mhm.
need to work out how to do that better. Like any moments as more of a senior leader that come to mind like that?
Yeah, I would say that I've learned a lot more from uh, not necessarily just watching failure, but being part of failure, watching things that you plan not go the way that you expected.
Yeah.
And so certainly I've had experiences with that as a senior school leader. For example, curriculum initiatives that seemed right, seemed to fit. You think you've done your homework on, you think you're ready to bring that to the community, to the families, to the teachers, to the school in general. And I can think of one in particular that was uh, planned and executed, and resources were brought, and we did not have a successful
Mm.
implementation of it for a variety of reasons. And I think I learned a lot from bringing that back, trying to bring that back from the brink of utter failure on that. When parents are complaining and teachers are complaining,
Yeah.
and you really believe in the direction that you're going, there's a lot that needs to be done there. From a leader's perspective, it's you're choosing: do I continue to let this initiative fail, or do I continue to bring my belief to it and
Mm.
figure out how to shore it up, how to make sure that that the areas that are causing it to struggle are supported, and and really politically and through good communication help people to understand the direction that I'm going in, and rescue this situation. So I'm thinking of one particular math curriculum that we tried to install, which was very, very different. The curriculum itself was from Singapore. At that time, Singapore had some of the highest scores in the world on some international maths assessments of their students. And so we took this curriculum from Singapore, hoping to raise the ability of our students to think mathematically. And to be honest, lots of time spent in understanding, learning from others about the curriculum. Not
Mm.
enough time spent thinking about how to communicate the vast differences between
Mm.
what parents and families and teachers expected from a math curriculum and what they actually got. So it was such a different approach that we really had to take a step back and figure out, number one, how to shore up my teachers, the people that are communicating that new initiative, how they can work with families. We started working on things like meetings with parents, and meetings, written documentation to help parents to see how we were doing things very differently with this Singapore curriculum than they were used to, and how they could help their students. So we spent a lot of time doing additional. I spent a lot of time meeting more with teachers, getting outside experts to meet with them, to help understand it more clearly and what the outcome would be. And then we spent quite a lot of time with parents and families, helping them understand to make that big adjustment. So to me, that initiative was an initiative that was really on the brink. It was ready to fail. It was ready for collapse. With when you have the users of your what you're producing unhappy, as a leader, you're either addressing that or you're letting go of that initiative. And so I'm glad that we were able to bring that back from the brink, because I do think it was the right curriculum and the right timing for that curriculum to
Yeah.
support the needs of our students. But I learned a lot about communication through that, and sought out some tools to help me with what are the elements that I really need to shore up here. So I have my own tool set that sort of says, okay, when you're going to bring out an initiative, you need to think about, have you resourced people? Have you talked enough about the mission? Have you talked enough about, how we envision that going down the road? So I think, when we talk about seminal experiences that influence you as a leader, I think, again, having something that was really on the verge of failing and figuring out a way to bring it back, that was pretty seminal to me, because it influenced everything going forward, right? So now I no longer approach initiatives the same way. I
Mhm.
approach them making a plan for each of those areas that I know needs to be addressed if I want to roll out something new.
That's a fantastic story, and that what I love about that story is schools. You hit the nail on the head earlier when you talked about how people don't understand what a head of school does. And actually, on a tangent, something that came to mind working with a lot of heads of schools is how much how interruptible school leaders have to be. It's just it's that's something I found anyway. You just constantly there's constantly things going on that every day is different and that a lot of people don't realize. That certainly shocked me when I started working with school leaders. I went, how do you you must have to, like, the idea of carving multiple times where you don't sort of get distracted or interrupted is much harder in a school environment. So that's just something I have a lot of respect
Mhm.
for school leaders, because it's a fascinating environment. Um,
Mhm.
but what I love about your story is how much you're, working with stakeholders, rolling that curriculum out. The principles apply across, it could have been any sector, it could have been any corporation, it could have been any stakeholders. I'm interested to know, as you reflect on it, you gave us a great, I guess, summary of the journey. But if you had to pick one key, what was the key thing that you felt you weren't doing when it wasn't working, and then what was the key thing that you did, or the lever that you pulled out of what you just mentioned, that you feel like really turned it around?
I'm going to say that I don't know. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to identify an exact key thing, but I think in general, conceptually, the
Mm.
idea would be that you do a little bit of a smaller thing in order to see how well it runs, or how well it does, before you do a larger thing on a bigger scale. So you scale it back a bit, and perhaps what I might have done differently is to walk through that initiative with one particular teacher, or with one
Yes.
particular group of teachers, before I rolled it out to an entire school, and just seen, what became the blind spots. So, for example, we figured out, one of the teachers' big complaints was, wow, there's a lot of preparation in order to do this math curriculum. I have to prepare so much. And what they what they were preparing was actual physical manipulatives that
Mm.
students would use, and it was taking up a lot of time. Well, that's very fixable. I can find some parent volunteers that can come in and do that, but I didn't know it was an issue
Yes.
until it was already in the classroom, being used in the classroom. And so it's a fixable issue. But if I had run that through with one particular teacher, or with a small group of teachers, I would have discovered that issue earlier. And I think, again, communication, I think, is probably the key area there, is how well am I communicating that vision, but also how well am I doing that at a smaller scale on an experiment basis before I get to the bigger scale and roll it all out. Um, I see how that influenced things over the course of my career, because it forced me to do, for example, I do professional development a lot with teachers.
Mm.
So they're coming into a seminar of some kind. I want it to be a workshop, so that they're actually doing what I'm wanting them to do. And I rarely do that now without a small group of de facto teachers that I bring in and work it through with a smaller group. Um, again, experimenting with the smaller group to see what works and what doesn't work, because when I roll it out to the larger group, I want to know based on my own little experiment, what is it that worked and didn't work for that smaller group, and therefore helps me focus on the bigger group and being more efficient with the bigger group. Um, yeah, so I mean, I definitely bring that from that experience with the math curriculum, and I think I brought that from seeing some failure and really doing a little bit of double loop learning. Like, this is what I believed beforehand, and now once that initiative or that professional development has started and has been going on, I need to loop back around and see if my initial beliefs were true, and that's more easily accomplished, I think, again, with better communication and input from the people that I serve.
That's so clever, and really reminds me of one of my favorite books, Blue Ocean Strategy, where they talk about rolling out strategy, really transformational initiatives and these sort of things, and they use the example of Apple stores, as they built one Apple store and then they reviewed and then they tested. They used that one store, and that's what I'm hearing you describe is actually take one person, one stakeholder, one class, roll it out with them, and do all the fact finding. Because, if you realize you need to knock down a wall, so to speak, it's way easier and cheaper, and just it ticks all the boxes if you have to only knock down one wall and then build the rest of them without that wall. Whereas if you go and build 30 stores at once, so to speak, in terms of how you roll it out, and then you realize, wait a second, that wall's actually in the way in every location, suddenly you've got an expensive and time-consuming and inefficient sort of process. So I think that's, but I've never applied that thinking to rolling out a strategic, something like curriculum. So I love that point of view. That's really helpful.
Hmm.
So let's chat
Yeah, I
about your
think
work
that.
with. Sorry, I was just going to. I'm really itching to ask you about your work with Harvard, because I
Yeah,
know you're so passionate about it. So tell me and
yeah,
tell our listeners about your work with Harvard, and then let's unpack that a little bit.
sure. So I think that one thing that I find many, particularly women leaders, struggle with is sort of this imposter syndrome, where we're all out there going, if I only knew a little bit more information, I would be the leader I'm destined to be, or I would be the person I'm destined to be if I just knew what other people know, right?
Yeah.
And I think, ironically, I think that's just not achievable. That's the you can read all day long, but you really actually have to practice and experiment with things, right? So, what I really loved about uh, finishing my doctorate was, it's a terminal degree. It's called a terminal degree. I'm done with it, right? But I didn't feel like after I finished my degree, I didn't feel like I had arrived. And that sort of um, you know f- feeling that I'm talking about here, where you're expecting to arrive and you don't arrive, right? It's just always a growth process as a leader. You're always changing and adjusting. You're always learning new things. And so, what I loved about having finished that doctorate and finding a, cert, a certificate program from Harvard Graduate School of Education called CALE. It's the Certificate in Advanced Educational Leadership that I have completed, but there are other certificates available from Harvard Graduate School of Education, aimed, I think, toward this idea. They've skimmed off the tools from
Mm.
their doctoral program and provide you the opportunity and the environment to work with other people in the program to use those tools in the context of your school. And so um, that's what I've done is taken seriously some of the tools that were provided and have been applying those to my own leadership over the last couple of years, and have really found them very effective in doing just what I've been mentioning, which is experimenting. I experimenting a bit with things and thinking about how to what's that experiment cycle? How do I get good feedback from the experimenting that I'm doing without reverting to surveys where we take an average, which is not actually a strong way to go about data gathering when you're leading from a data driven perspective. So how else do you do it? How else do you gather information about the people that you're leading or the organization that you're leading, and move forward? And so that's some of the tools that Harvard has provided for me.
That's incredible, because one of my favorite things, I can't remember where I first heard it, but I do love the idea of, leaders always need to get used to seeing failures and mistakes in their own life, but then particularly in the people they lead in a different light, and realize that's part of the journey to ultimately to, winning championships, so to speak, and really taking whatever the vision is and seeing it become a reality. But that's really hard to do, I've found, for myself and anyone I work with. But the idea of having a hypothesis, that's something I've been able to get my head around, and I've seen that help people as well. So I love what you're talking about, because can I easily accept failure? No, definitely not easily. I'm getting better at it. But can I position something I'm doing as a leader, a project that I'm working on, a project we're working on with my team, a project one of the people on my team is working on? Can we position that as a hypothesis and then work towards that? Yes. And that makes failure, we become more like a scientist, actually saying, well, that didn't work. Why? And this is part of the process of getting an answer. So what have you found? What have you found for you has been most helpful in thinking like that? Because that's something every leader listening could improve what they're doing if they can learn to do that better.
Absolutely. So what you're talking about, when we form a hypothesis, we're really talking about the scientific method, right?
Yeah.
And so, I'm not a scientist. What I do is half art, half science, and and I think that's true for a lot of people. Anybody working in the social sectors, particularly, are going to find themselves without a really easily quantifiable job and ability to do things. If I were a
True.
salesman, it'd be very clear, it's the amount of money I'm bringing in. But as an educator, it becomes a little bit more complex how we measure those things. So you mentioned scientific method ideas. To me, the thing that I'm pulling from Harvard, the thing that I find interesting that I've been applying is something called design thinking. It's out there. It's practiced by every tech company. It's practiced by a lot of people in the sort of STEAM professions. And I sort of relate it to the scientific method, but I think it's the scientific method for people, not for a scientific experiment, but a scientific method for people. Basically, it's design around people, around what people need. It's hugely empathetic. And that's actually the first stage of it, is just empathizing. And there are lots and lots of tools for figuring out how to empathize with the people that we lead. That right there, just looking for, searching your environment for challenges and doing that through someone else's eyes, I think is the first step towards innovating in your organization in a way that is unique to your organization. So, the first step of that cycle is empathizing. Then we get into defining the challenge. Then we ideate, or we come up with some sample ideas that potentially solve for the challenge. Then we prototype those things, and then we test. And we go through that cycle over and over again. But I found what's been very useful to me as a school leader is those empathy projects that I can initiate, or those empathy tools that I can use. So, and that can be a wide range of things, everything from following a student around for a day to see what life is like from their viewpoint,
Yes.
to observing the people that are sitting in the meeting when you're discussing certain things, and actually noting their body language, actually noting where they are engaged with what you're meeting about. Again, there's a huge range of empathy tools that are out there, to sort of get into the habit and get into the practice of scanning your environment for what's happening and viewing it with an idea of supporting a solution to what other people see as an issue. So, as a leader, this is where my vision then becomes multiplied, because I'm looking at it from many, many different angles and able
Yeah.
to get more data input, even if it's very casual data, even if it's very temporary in the moment data. It's part of that gathering of my community, gathering of information from my community that's valuable to me as a leader, to help figure out what the next steps are, and particularly what the next innovative steps might be.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And are there any stories that have been, that come to mind of how you've been doing this that are particularly memorable for you and have been really significant?
Absolutely. I'll relay this one because it really it kind of supports what I'm saying here. Started at a new school in a new role, and one of my tasks was to talk with all the people that I'm the line manager. Let's talk about what are some things going on in your position. What are some
Mm.
challenges you're finding? Tell me about it. And in that conversation, discovered very quickly that one of my department heads was really challenged by finding time for the adults to meet around the students' needs. Like, it was just taking too much time out of the very busy school teachers' schedules to get together to talk about how to support students that were struggling. Now, they could be struggling with special education needs, they could be struggling with English language needs, they could be struggling with, they're living in a boarding house scenario, and they're struggling, to get along socially. There are many, many different needs, but what we were finding, as I talked with one department manager, was that as I began that conversation with other specialized department managers, they were repeating the same issue, which is, we don't know when a child is struggling, we don't know quickly enough to intervene. We don't know well enough to know if this is a problem in only one area or if the child is struggling across many areas. It just became an issue that was just very glaring as I talked with all of those department managers. And it's a bit of a bound issue, because people are saying the issue is I don't have time to do this. So to
Yeah.
discuss one child and to bring in all of these, bring in perhaps if they're a high school student, they might have 7 or 8 teachers, and then the specialist teachers, bring them all in, and just finding the time when we all can meet, and to meet for a long enough time to really get to the heart of the problem. It was consuming, very consuming. So in listening to that, we brought them together with another school administrator, our student support person, and together we just all talked around the table, uh, and we got out basically everything that we could possibly think of that
Mm.
was really standing in the way of us doing a good job supporting these students. And it was a long list. It actually, to be honest, it took us several meetings, because people need to talk about these things. They need to talk about what's going well, but they equally need to talk about what's not going well. And they
Sure.
equally need to talk about things that you can do something about, as much as they need to talk about things that you can't do anything about. So just even exhausting the conversation in the group, I think it took us about 3 meetings of potentially 2 or 3 hours each, just with those managers talking out what the issue is.
Mm.
It's interesting. The longer I think that you empathize, the clearer it becomes to the group what the actual root problem is. So often it's easier to solve the surface symptoms of a problem than it is to
Yeah.
solve the underlying root problem. And sometimes in talking in a large group like that, or and having a meeting with like minds, you get to the point where you understand that what you thought it was. So my managers at that time were thinking it's a time management issue. I don't have time to meet with these groups about a particular student. What we discovered was it was actually much deeper than that. It wasn't a time issue so much as it was a communication issue.
Sure.
Um, and as we began to really work on shaping a problem statement, uh, it really shaping a challenge or a problem statement involves a little bit of art, right? So we went back to it several times. We added adjectives to it. We were looking for a way to phrase out our challenge clearly and articulately, articulate it well, um, to articulate it in a way that helped us to begin to tackle it. So up to that point, we've spent a lot of time talking about problems, getting it into a position where we actually made an agreed upon challenge statement or problem statement, I think is another key area of growth that's come from doing this kind of work, this design thinking kind of work, which is
Mm.
so often when I, as a leader, am talking with people, whether it's in a committee, whether it's between myself and a parent over a student's issue, whether it's speaking with my board, if we all don't understand that we're trying to solve the same challenge, then we will not be satisfied with the solution. So I think there's something to be said for spending some time empathizing so you make sure that you actually get an agreed upon point of this is what the challenge is. And once you can get to that, I think you suddenly find yourself able to solve problems in your organization that are deeper than just that surface level symptom that we're talking about that may look very easy to solve. I just got to find more money or more time or more people or more whatever. It looks easy to solve, but suddenly you start solving deeper educational and organizational challenges. And it's a little time consuming on the front end, but again, getting to that challenge statement was pretty key for us to be able to
Mm.
come up with a solution. I'll jump ahead without explaining everything we did in once we got that challenge statement. But once
Yeah.
we had that challenge statement, that entire group of people, that committee of people that had come together, suddenly had a mission. Now we've got a real clear mission. We have a challenge statement that needs to be solved. Basically, we're saying, how might we create a system that solves, and we had some adjectives in there, given that our organizational mission statement was to serve students. So we're working together now on a really specific adjective rich challenge statement. And now we all go away from this meeting, the last meeting that we've had, where we've been empathizing, and we just all think, how can we solve now this very rich, very dynamic challenge? And so, it begins to be at that point, we're moving along the line to we're ideating, right? We're coming up with, okay, here's some potential solutions, some potential ways to address this challenge. And we're experimenting a bit with those. Like, let's try them and see. Let's try them and see. We finally came up with a prototype, which wound up being very innovative. What we did was take a portion of an already existing student information system, and we repurposed it so that our teachers could give a very quick score on a very short rubric about how individual students were doing in their homeroom classes. And I mean, it was a very simplified rubric. We asked some key areas of student well-being, things like, how they're doing academically, their attention level, their attention an attendance in the classroom, their seeming social interactions in the classroom, their how they seem to be doing on their emotional health. Very short, very, very easy. And we kind of set to 0 for those homeroom teachers. And we just said, if you see a problem, tick the students up a number, or if you see a really big problem, tick them up 2 numbers. And so we had a scale, very short scale, 1, 2, 3, 4. If the students were at that 3 or 4, we were a little concerned if it happened in one class. If the student was at a 3 or 4 and it's happening across multiple classes, because now we can pull all that data together in one report, we can say, oh, 7 or 8 teachers, and all of them are ranking this student as doing great. Or all of them are ranking this student as struggling socially. Or all of them are ranking this student as didn't do their homework this week. That system being able to look very quickly supported coaches in the athletic department, because they now said, oh, I don't want you to come out and play basketball, or I do want you to come out and play basketball, but I want to make sure you get your homework done first. So I'm going to set up extra help for you to make sure that you can play this week's game. But we're going to make sure you get your math homework done before then, because that's where you're having an issue. All of a sudden, everybody was instantly alerted to where the weaknesses are with the students. And it was a very instant report. We were able to repurpose a staff member that became our well-being coordinator. We called her our success coordinator. And basically her whole task was to get that report from those individual teachers, which took about 5 minutes for the teachers to do, not time consuming at all. Get that report together and to communicate that to the coaches, the special coordinators, the English language person, the boarding house director, the principal that might be involved, the individual teachers that may not realize that the child that's not doing well in a science class is also not doing well in his or her English class. And so what it did was it created the ability for us as an organization to really have real communication in the moment, timely enough to be able to support those kids well. And we saw results, because we were communicating better now with both parents and with students, because suddenly the students were like, oh, we didn't know you knew that. We didn't know you knew that we didn't turn in homework in all of our classes today. But that success coordinator is looking at the report going, oh dear, here's one child that hasn't done anything all this week, is really struggling this week. And what we were able to do with that is that instant feedback helped us to get instant help to those students in the appropriate area, and then helped us to get those students moved on. And hopefully that next week, you weren't seeing the same results. You were seeing some improvement. And we got really great response from parents who were suddenly getting information more quickly than they ever had before, but in an innovative way. I think the typical school might connect those parents to the term grades or reports, that come out when the teachers have finished giving a score to a particular assignment or that type of thing, which is fine, but it doesn't tell the whole picture of the student. It doesn't show the strengths or weaknesses in all the areas that we want to know about a student. It's not just the academics, it's the social, it's the emotional, it's how are you getting along with your peers. And so it became a very innovative piece for us that really energized everyone to rally around our school mission, our school organizational idea of being student-centered. Suddenly we were doing the thing we said we were doing, but we were really doing it. And that just, I think that what that does is it gives everybody a sense of success in the process, because you are meeting the mission. It feels great to be able to actually see a difference and on the week-to-week basis as we're doing this. It just energized our entire community in a direction that was doing, again, what our mission statement was, which is to be student-centered.
Wow. That is honestly an incredible story. And I think all leaders will be scribbling notes, but I think the school leaders out there, there'll be some school leaders who were listening to this in the car, have pulled over in a safe location and are taking notes because I tell you, Brenda, and I know that you know this is so exciting. That's why you're so excited about it. But that is honestly such an incredible story in a school, because that is what you just described is uh, it's it has to be. I can't think of a bigger challenge for school leaders right now. And you're so right. It always comes up as a time management issue. And that is just incredible that you were able to see those results. And it's so simple.
Yes. And that's just it. Again, I do think it comes back to defining that challenge correctly.
Yes.
If I had defined, that challenge without ever meeting as a group with those different department managers, if I had just defined it based on my first conversation, it would have been, how do I create more time for this person? Right? Do I
Yes.
need to hire another person because it's just time consuming? But that wasn't what the real issue was. It wasn't a time issue. That was just the surface symptom. The real issue was we weren't communicating well as a school staff, right? The real issue came down to, how do we create a system that is simple, effective, quick, and gives us all the data that we need to drive forward our different roles, our different, again, in leadership circles, we call it, what's our theory of action? So now, once we have that communication going well, the student success coordinator, the principal, the English as a English language learner department leader, the special education needs leader, the boarding house leader, all the different areas now suddenly can take that and form their own theory of action, right? Oh, I know this kid has a problem. Now my theory of action is, I know that if I give them good feedback, have a good conversation with this child, perhaps support them in a different way, get them into a pattern of some sort, I can actually solve this problem.
Yeah, that's such a, and it's such a counterintuitive thought that you actually need to spend most time at the start to really nail the challenge, because there's something in you that wants to just jump ahead and find a solution, but it's actually, you just unpack that so well. Well, let me jump into Leadership Express questions to land today. Are you ready?
Yes.
What is a book that you've gifted to other people?
Oh, wow. Oh my gosh. I almost always gift First Days of School by Lee. Um, yeah, I almost always gift that to somebody because it's just the basics on how to be a good teacher. So when I'm coaching teachers or when I'm coaching teacher leaders, that generally becomes one of my big ones. It's old, but it's good.
Oh, that's so good. I love a good recommendation like that. That I haven't had on here before, and particularly for school leaders. But also, that's just really interesting. I'm sure there'd be principles in there that would apply beyond just school as well. So good. Okay, any great podcasts you're listening to at the moment, or other sources you're enjoying reading, watching, listening to right now?
No, but it's bringing to mind Schooling by Design, which is a McTighe book, which I think most educators are familiar with Understanding by Design. But there's one called Schooling by Design, which is a little lesser known work, and that little book is such a gem. I reference it all the time about aligning my mission, aligning all the things in a school. Just really essential, I think. And so I do, that one sits on my desk. I reference it a lot.
Yeah, love it. Another great recommendation. What's a recent leadership lesson you've learned for the first time or been reminded of?
I'm working my way through how to shape a really good theory of action.
Hmm.
I'm spending a bit of time on that idea, and what it is, what it isn't, how to make it better, how to give some clarity in it, so that when I'm working with a team of some sort, I can clarify that with them. Like, what is your takeaway here now that we've come to the point where we understand the problem, we've got a prototype for the solution. Now, what's your theory of action? How are we going to use our beliefs as a person to enact uh, a, a, an idea.
Yeah, love it. What's a great piece of advice you've received?
It's one that I received probably 20 years ago, and that's fit the task to the time and not the time to the task, which might sound counterintuitive to everything I just said, but it isn't. It's knowing where to spend your time, and
Yeah,
we have limited time, so sometimes you just say, you know what, I'm gonna do the best, whatever the thing is that I'm responsible for in 1 hour that I can possibly do, rather than spend 20 hours on something that probably can't be improved upon in that time. I'm just going to give myself this amount of time, and I'm going to do the task in that amount of time, and I'm just going to do the best I can with that.
that's fantastic advice. What's a big struggle or problem that you see educational leaders facing today?
Post COVID, how it changes education or doesn't change education, I think is going to be a really interesting question.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's obviously affected everyone in every sector, but I really feel that educational leaders are have been, yeah, it's been a real shake up, and there's a lot of people who are struggling. There's a lot of
Absolutely.
amazing opportunities and amazing stories, and a lot of people that are just clinging on to get through the school
Absolutely.
year in different parts of the world. I think a movie or TV show that really impacted you.
Absolutely. A movie or TV show? Can I say a book, but not in my field? Is the 1619 Project, which is quite controversial in America right now, talking about historical roots of African Americans or Black Americans and their experiences. So, yeah, 1619 Project.
1619 Project. Thank you. That's great. And okay, two more because I want to ask you this one. What's a tip for finding and keeping great talent?
I think that having the conversation with the referees for any position that you're seeking to hire is it's worth spending a little more time with the referees. I know we all want to, like, here's 3 reference forms sent out to 3 different people that this person used to work for, but I think it's worth a bit of a conversation. I think it tells you a little more deeply who the candidate is, and there are many times when I wish that I'd had those conversations when I'm having to make some corrective actions with an employee, because I discover that this is something they've never been given feedback on in the past. So it's really helpful, I think, to know to dig a little deeper on the references, and find out what is the feedback they've been given in their prior employment, and how can we support coaching people into their roles and actually affecting some change so that they grow professionally.
Yeah, that's a great thought. I love Patrick Lencioni's work around the ideal team player, and he talks about a
Yes.
question to ask referees, which I've found really helpful. Is rather than saying, say humility, like how did you find this person was to work with in terms of, being able to own responsibility for their mistakes and share when they don't know. He actually talks about just shifting it and saying, what do you think? How do you think other team members saw this person, or how do you think their team saw them? And it's such a tiny
Yes.
change, but I think it lets people off the hook to tell you, you know, without wanting to, a good leader who's had
Right.
that person before then might feel comfortable to say, well, look, I think in their team there was a bit of a sense that they blah blah blah. Whereas sometimes saying that about someone people can feel a bit torn, because you really do want the best for that person, but you also want to be honest. So I just found that's a little hack that I found really helpful when you're talking to a referee, is just to change the language to say, how do you think some of their team found them in this way or that way, just to take it off
Right.
their personal experience and to let them off the hook a bit. That was just a thought that came into my mind when you shared that, so I thought I'd throw that out there. Um, okay, last question. If you could only give one piece of leadership advice to a young leader, what would you say?
I've been asked this question before, and I always think that my answer is sometimes surprising to people because it's not a feel good measure. My advice to young people that want a leadership position is to sit in on every difficult conversation that you possibly can. So when that parent is screaming in a school, when that teacher is crying in a school, when that, every
Yeah.
bad scenario that you possibly get, sit in on those, because there's a lot to be learned from how different leaders approach those things. And I certainly have learned from when I was coming up, before I was a head of school, watching my own head of school be incredibly patient in places where I would just have gotten up and left the room. I just didn't have the patience for it. But to watch somebody else have the patience to really work through a problem is so valuable, and see how they speak and act in those meetings. Yeah, it really becomes inspirational that I want to be that kind of leader. That only really comes out, I think, when things are really, I'd say, with a high degree of emotion around it, right? So
Mm,
whether that's upset parents, or a sad and unhappy teacher, or a sad and unhappy kid, what's the learning point you can get from watching other people interact, and just being, I don't want to say a fly on the wall, but in some cases I think that is what you're doing. You don't need to be part of the conversation, but
yeah.
just to observe how other people respond. And I think that many young leaders get discouraged when they get into those scenarios and they don't know what to do. It's really hard to sit in a room when somebody's not happy, and
Yeah.
that can be really discouraging to the profession, right? So you walk into that room, you have a bad experience, and you're like, I don't know if this whole leadership thing is for me. And
Mm,
what observing others, when you can be relaxed, observing others get through that, I think helps you to see that it's normal. This is a normal thing to deal with, and it maybe helps you regulate your own emotions a bit more, so that you're not going home and having a restless night of sleep, um, because you observed something that didn't go down emotionally the way you needed it to. So I think it does help you to regulate that when you see others dealing with difficult experiences, difficult communications.
that's wonderful advice. I've never had that as the thought, but I think that is a really profound and great piece of advice, because it doesn't get much harder than being the leader in those conversations. So why not embrace the fact that, particularly as a young leader, any opportunities you get to watch how leaders navigate those is going to be gold. That's fantastic, Brenda. Well, for those, particularly for those school leaders who want to, who really want to hunt you down and find out how on earth you did that around well-being, but also no, also for anyone who wants to get in touch with you, and maybe they found something you've shared today really helpful. Where can people find you online in terms of LinkedIn, or any way they can contact you or the organization?
Absolutely. I'm on LinkedIn. Then that would be my preferred way to connect with me. And I'm Brenda Williamson, EDD. Is my profile fairly easy to find? Not a whole lot of us, and then you'll see that my professional resume includes Vietnam, Korea, Indonesia.
Yeah, absolutely. Excellent. People can find you there. Well, I want to thank our listeners for tuning in. And today's been such a great episode. And I've learned a lot about design thinking. And it's definitely got my brain ticking over around how I can apply this with myself and also with clients. Don't forget, listeners, you can also check out my Jonno White Leadership podcast, where I give you more just tips on how to cast vision and how to build a high performance team, and the leadership question of the day, where I ask you a different question every day to put a stone in your shoe and just help you to really grow as a leader and embrace being uncomfortable and growing. But I want to finish today by saying a massive thank you to Brenda for sharing some great stories. And really, I just found the way you articulated and unpacked design thinking in your sector, and how you've done that as a leader will really help a lot of people. So thank you for being so generous with your time and coming on here.
All right. Thank you.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Leadership Conversations podcast as much as I did. If you're joining us for the first time, don't forget to check out consultclarity.org. That's our website, consultclarity.org. We have so many free resources on there, including our 7 Questions on Leadership series. We've had more than 1,500 leaders from all over the world in all different roles, in different industries, answer these 7 questions on leadership, and leaders give these in-depth answers around how they spend their time, a book that's been significant for them. It's just a gold mine. It's completely free to access, so go to consultclarity.org and look for that. We'd also love to interview you about your leadership. I believe your experience, your life, your context means that you have advice on leadership that other leaders can learn from. Yes, you, if you're going, not me. Well, no, I really believe you would have something to add. So if you're looking for a way to give back, it's completely free to get involved. And we would love to interview you through the 7 Questions on Leadership. You just go to consultclarity.org/7-questions-interest, or Google consultclarity.org 7 questions interest and fill out the form and get involved. We have a free resource on our website called the Leadership Survival Guide. It's a 57-page ebook, 10 world-class leaders giving their thoughts on leadership, and that's completely free. It's available on our homepage, consultclarity.org, right at the top, so make sure you go and get that and download it today. And we have a free daily email that you can subscribe to. We send this out to over 15,000 leaders from around the world. And it contains the highlights of content from our podcasts, our blogs, our books we're reading. It's got the best content, and it gives you exclusive, limited, early access to our masterclasses, workshops, new products, special offers. It's all for our subscribers. You can go to consultclarity.org/subscribe and join 15,000 other leaders. And my gift to you is to work really hard, particularly through the Leadership Conversations podcast. I have been blown away by the quality of the leaders, and I'm learning as much as anyone in doing these interviews. So I'm having a great time. And my gift to you is to keep lining up the best leaders I can to invest in your leadership. Your gift to me, if you're finding this helpful, there is something that you could do that would help us out massively. And that is to write a review and to leave a rating for our podcast or wherever you're watching or listening to this. I can't tell you how much that helps us out. Also, subscribe or follow. It really does make a difference in helping us to help more leaders become everything they're meant to be. Another thing that means a lot to me personally is when I see our community share our content. So if you do share this or any other piece of content on social media, then thank you, and please do that. And look for me, Jonno White, or Clarity, and tag us in your post. Our team is always looking for posts to engage with from our community, and there's also a chance that we'll share your content to go beyond and share it with our followers. Last of all, you can check out my book. It's called Step Up or Step Out: How to Deal with Difficult People Even If You Hate Conflict. I wrote this book because 50% of the coaching sessions I have with leaders, this topic comes up again and again and again. And it's this idea of, how do I have this difficult conversation? How do I lead this person better when I'm finding them difficult? Or in some cases, you look and you say, I think I might be leading a difficult person. They're just quite difficult to lead, or I'm finding them quite difficult to lead. So there's a 3-step process that I unpack in Step Up or Step Out. And the amazing thing, and I've literally done this myself, and I've heard it anecdotally from other leaders as I've coached them, is that if you follow this process, you will see that person step up and change their behavior or make a decision, which is to step out some of the time. 95% of the time, people will step up or step out in just 4 weeks. And I stand by that. It's you have to read the book to understand, but I really do believe in it, and I've experienced it firsthand. It works. So you can go to Amazon, look up Step Up or Step Out Jonno White, or store.consultclarity.org/book. Well, thank you so much for listening. We're going to be back with a new episode next time of the Leadership Conversations podcast. And I hope today has helped you to take another step towards becoming the leader you're meant to be. See you next time.